Often, you'll find the hardest part about expressing creativity is digging it up from that wellspring of creative energy that lies just beneath the surface of our mundane and day to day lives. It isn't too uncommon that to reach that font of creative energy, we need an instigator, a spark that ignites the big, beautiful fire inside our mind to take hold and help us splatter a little color into our seemingly gray lives. This little spark can simply be called inspiration, and just as everyone releases creative energy in a different way, we too become inspired in different ways. Often we are inspired by experiences or by our goals and desires, and these little nodes of inspiration inside of us bloom because of our experiences and our desires. And no sooner that they bloom, they then flourish into brilliant gardens of wonder and whimsy we never before thought possible. Everyone can make something incredible, even if they don't yet realize it. For me, my creative energy flows out most prominently when I'm just on the verge of falling asleep, tirelessly rolling back and forth as these ideas try to claw out from within me to escape before I drift off. They want nothing more than to take form and exist in this world, but none too soon before they emerge, I drift off into a dream, where the sheer absurdity of the dream quells these intense longings of creative freedom. Occasionally, I'll grant these creative little ideas a compromise. I'll write them down such that I may remember them the following day, and should I find a way to access my own font of creative energy, I'll act upon them on that following day, all in exchange for a good night's rest. That brings me, or rather us, to now. Here I lie, with only one thing on my mind. Feather. Fittingly, as I write this draft mere moments before I decide to turn in for the night, I'm reminded of a game that I can really only describe as a dream. It's a classic dream, a dream of flying high in the sky and having the liberty to go where you please, to see all below you as a big, beautiful landscape and to be so careless and free. It's such a primal desire to fly. If you're of the type to believe that our dreams are manifestations of our deepest wants and desires, then the desire to fly up and away is simply your desire to break free from the stresses of life, to soar high above your problems on the ground and to be one with the vast open sky. So often we have this dream, and that just makes you wonder, what do birds dream about then? Feather is a little bit unconventional, but nonetheless beautiful and astounding in its own unique way. It doesn't really fall into any of your typical video game genres or categories in that it doesn't really feel like a game. Feather is more of an anti-game. Okay, that sounds pretty negative, but I honestly mean that in the nicest way. It kind of goes against everything the player would usually play a game for. The closest genre I could tie it to is the sandbox genre, in that there's no objective, there's no winning, and there's no losing. And now the skeptical audience is asking, so there's no point. And to that I say quite the contrary, actually. Feather does have a point. It's just not a clear one. It's one of those muddy, it is what you make of it kind of games. And in such, the topic has always been polarizing. If you can't make anything of it, you won't appreciate it as much as someone who can make something of it. But maybe I can help lend some credibility with some facts, or opinions worded so aggressively they come off as so. First off, in Feather, you play as a bird. Astounding, I know. You are thrust into this world from the moment you hit play, and it's here you begin learning the very fundamentals of Feather. How to fly, be it very quickly, very slowly, or just soaring at a casual pace through the air. There's rarely a point where you aren't flying around in some way. It is the core gameplay of Feather. It is the only gameplay of Feather. However, supplementing your newly found ability to fly is the ability to do neat little spins and barrel rolls in the air, as well as a handy little 180 flip that sends you back in the other direction without much having to fight the camera. There is one other thing you can do though, and that is make beautiful, beautiful noise. Via a quick tap, a long press, or somewhere in between of a single button or key, you emit a chirp, tweet, squawk, or caw depending on what flavor of bird you happen to be at the moment. A seemingly useless feature, but its relevance will be made known shortly. And you may be concerned. That's it? That's all there is. The basic gameplay functions of Feather are flying, singing, and spinning. Now what? As in most sandbox games, that's up for you to decide. You can set your own little goals around the island, carve out flight paths and obstacle courses, and explore at your leisure. It's simple, and it's fun. Much of Feather's value comes from its presentation. It has a simple art style that can still be truly beautiful to look at. It could have gone for a more realistic approach, but I can only imagine the rendering nightmare that would have been. And in a way, I feel that the art style it settled on is more charming and genuine. It would just lose its dreamlike luster if it were any more grounded and realistic. This, accompanied by some brilliant music that is changed around by the player just naturally exploring the island and flying through shrines, the same way you're able to change what kind of bird you are, it truly becomes what it is: an experience as opposed to a game. An anti-game. Now you're probably thinking, that's kind of dumb. I've gotten experiences from lots of different games, and Feather is a little different in that the experience you get from other games are generally provided by its story, or its narrative, or something of that degree, whereas Feather lacks these features. There is no story, there is no plot, there's no good versus evil. Even the most wide open of sandboxes like Minecraft have some degree of story or plot or something going on, objectives, goals, things to do at the very end. Feather does not. Feather is simply the most pure bird experience you can get. It's aimless, and it's beautiful in its aimlessness. You just fly around. There doesn't need to be anything more complex than that. Nothing to stress you out, nothing to worry about. You just fly around. Adding on to the overall experience of the game, there is also a dynamic weather system, which can go a long way to immersing the player in their own little island paradise. The environments are varied and distinct, with large mountains, forests, old ruins, and constructs, the purpose of which can only be speculated on, and even a network of caves that you can fly through should you be skilled enough. It makes the action of simply flying around and exploring no less boring, even after you think you've seen all there is to see. You can simply take a new route or path at a different angle, and you can reveal an entirely different experience. Around every metaphorical corner, there is a breathtaking view just waiting to be screenshot and shared. That's another part of the simple beauty of the game, is the sense that it feels like a dynamic and ever-shifting art piece that you're meant to share with others, as though it was planned and intended that at any given moment, a still frame of your gameplay could end up in a museum, representing some abstract concept like the duality of man or ornithophobia or something. You're just a bird, flying around. It's gorgeous. And I suppose for people who are more compelled by concrete objectives and a gripping story or narrative, there isn't much here for you, beyond what lies in your own head, and at first glance it does seem a little shallow. But there is one feature that I neglected to mention about Feather. It's a multiplayer game. You never realize it at first, but those other birds flying around the island with you aren't AI. Those are real players. People just like you soaring about the island aimlessly and soaking in the beauty and majesty of such a simple and glorious game. And it seems silly, but it adds such a small but dynamic and enjoyable social layer to the game that I can't really explain why I like it so much. It's just so charming to me. To me, it feeds into the idea that Feather is an anti-game, whereas other games would have multiplayer as a selling feature, with co-op and competitive modes and all that. Feather just tosses it in. It's an amazing addition in my opinion, and it makes your time flying about the island feel substantially less lonely. In fact, almost every time I've encountered a fellow bird, I've chirped at them, only to find that they almost always respond in kind. Suddenly, that little button isn't so useless anymore. In fact, it's far from useless. It's your only way of communicating with other players. What you're trying to communicate is a little less clear, but it's typically something along the lines of, yes, I'm here, look at me, I'm a bird as well, let's go fly around the island aimlessly, together. And around that time, you usually chase each other around the island in some sort of race with no clear finish line, squawking furiously back and forth until our little game has attracted more birds to join in. It's incredible, and it requires little more than a few noises made between your virtual birds to initiate such wordless joy. Unfortunately, there often aren't enough players online at the same time to make this interaction possible, much less in the same area, but the fact that it's possible at all is fantastic. It's one of the most unique social dynamics I've ever seen in a multiplayer game. It took me only a short hour to complete Feather. That is to say, gather every achievement on the PS4 and unlock the Platinum Trophy. But that isn't to say that I'm done with the game. Far from it, actually. I feel like I've only just breached the surface of the fun I can possibly have with this colorful and vibrant open landscape. And I can also take comfort in knowing that when every other game is stressing me out, or just life in general has got me down, I can relax for a bit and just be a bird, flying high and soaring away from my problems. It instills a sort of trance-like zen in the player, and I love it. I don't review a lot of games. It isn't really my specialty, and much less often do I review a game with sincerity, as a more comical and sarcastic approach tends to be my forte in that department as well. And that should tell you all you need to know about Feather. The fact that I don't feel the need to bolster this review with jokes or any other secondary commentary. It's just simply beautiful. I mean, the sheer absurdity of the fact that I was able to write nearly 2,000 words about a game I've hardly played for 2 hours now, all while being half asleep, should tell you that first off, I am not a very credible source for video game opinions, and second, there are much, much worse ways to spend $10 in an afternoon. I promise. You got a hard day at work? Feather. On a losing streak? Feather. Stressed out? Feather. It doesn't matter. And if nothing else, use it as a tool to soar away from your problems, high into the clouds and further beyond. Use it as an instigator for all that bound up creative energy inside, and let free your own beautiful birdsong for the world to hear. Other than being a tool for relaxation, I hope that Feather can also inspire you in the same way it inspired me to make this video. Very few games can do such a thing. I'm not very easily motivated. I do have a soft spot for birds, though. That part was basically cheating. My final opinion on the game. Feather is an absolutely brilliant game. I've never been so immediately awestruck by the simplistic beauty of any form of media. It's so unlike any conventional game, and yet it instills that sense of wonder and whimsy that games used to provide, where everything was so new and foreign, like picking up a controller for the first time as a kid. I love the seamless multiplayer and the simple yet complex interactions you can have with other real-life players simply by flying around and making noise at them, just as real birds would. I enjoy that there's no objective, no pressing task or anything to stress about. You simply do as you feel like doing, just as any other avian would. It's beautiful and immersive. The lack of any sort of HUD and minimal guidance makes the game feel more like an experience than an actual game. And that's a good thing. The experience is very inspiring. Very few moments in any game have made me feel anything similar to what breaching the clouds into the vast open sky above the island made me feel, and I'll be sure to remember it for as long as I enjoy the hobby of gaming. I love Feather. 10 out of 10. Would squawk at strangers again and again.